It's my absolute pride to welcome you all to our webinar on race at work. And while I mention that, I will say that the hashtag that we're using tonight is hashtag race at work. So if you are tweeting about the event, if you'd like to share some quotes or some bits from the event on social media, please do use that hashtag. Leicester's going to be whipping up a Twitter storm, he tells me, so hopefully we can all add to that. I'm going to introduce my our speakers this evening, who on a personal and professional level I'm incredibly proud to introduce and to work with. So this evening we're going to be hearing from the General Secretary of the TUC, Frances O'Grady, the Chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force and the General Secretary of the NASUWC, Dr. Patrick Roach, Gloria Mills, who is the Chair of our Race Relations Committee and National Officer for Unison, and Shavana Taj, who is my sister in arms and our General Secretary of the TUC in Wales. And they'll all be speaking this evening on the issue that's gathered us all here today around race at work. I'm going to just do a few housekeeping bits. We are not going to be using the chat function this evening. Leicester has disabled that, but we do really welcome interaction, we welcome participation, and we welcome your questions to any of our speakers. And if you do want to ask questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which you will find in the toolbar at the bottom, and we will address those throughout the seminar tonight. And before we start with our first speaker, I just want to talk a little bit about why we're here and why this webinar tonight more than ever is necessary. And that's because despite what the Sewell report would have told you, race is still a problem. Race is still a problem at work, and Black people are suffering from industrial related issues around pay, progression and employment now more than ever. The statistics that came out today from the ONS show us that the BME unemployment rate has increased significantly over the last year, and that comparison is 14% increase for BME people and 4.1% for white workers. And I think that employment rate in and of itself tells us why it's really important that we organise and we gather and we discuss the factors that are affecting this. We know that 1 in 11 BME workers is no longer in work, unemployed people. And we know that we are calling time and time again for the government to really tackle the systemic and structural problems that exist that are creating these problems. They're not imagined from nowhere. But we're not sitting back either. The trade union movement has always been at the forefront when it's come to challenging racism, when it's come to holding the government's feet to the fire over its poor record on opportunities and work for Black people. And I mentioned Dr. Patrick Roach. He is the chair of a cross-platform trade union-led initiative, which is the Anti-Racism Task Force, whose job it is to lead by example and address the factors that are affecting Black people at work, to reduce those factors and to ensure that there is a fair and equal opportunity for all people, and Black people aren't held back by those systems that exist not only in the workforce but also in the trade union movement. I'm also proud to announce that the Lawrence family are heavily involved with the Anti-Racism Task Force. They are patrons of the work, and given that we've come along so far in terms of time, but not so far in terms of achievement since the Neville report, I think it's incredibly important we have that level of involvement and that level of history and understanding. Last week, you would have seen on the news the stance that Glasgow took against deportations, and again, the trade union movement was significantly involved and heavily involved in organising and making sure that when it came down, when the time came to demonstrate what our values were, they were demonstrated loud and clear for the entirety of the country to see. And I think we are constantly challenging and holding the government to account and asking them to deliver on the promises that they make and to deliver on tackling injustice for BME workers. But I'm not going to say any more about that because you've got an amazing set of speakers this evening. I'm just going to get the agenda back up. And proud to hand over first and foremost to Frances O'Grady.
Hi, thank you very much indeed, Kudzia. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Exactly as Kudzia said, you know, it kind of beggars belief we're even having to say this really, but we do have to, it appears, in the light of the Sewell report. Racism is real, and the TUC task force on anti-racism I think has really shone a light on that, and it's good that we've got that out into the public domain through the media, exactly what is happening in terms of unemployment, in terms of how much faster unemployment amongst Black and ethnic minority people is rising, who's taking the brunt of that, young Black and ethnic minority women in particular, but also building on other analysis that we put out there in terms of insecurity at work and the fact that Black and ethnic minority people are far more likely to be in key worker jobs exposed to the virus. And we've already pressed the links between those death rates, those illness rates, and where it is that people work and the failure to provide proper PPE, proper safety standards, but also to cut out those 0 hours contracts that make people vulnerable and very often deny them proper sick pay too. Kudzia talked about that Sewell report. I mean, the truth is Tony Sewell has form, some would say, but I'm less interested in the individuals who sat on that commission and more interested in the key message they were pushing, not least because I detect the fingerprints of number 10 all over it. And it seems to me that the key message was the problems that we face are not because of racism, they're because of class, but they're not because of class, they're because of place. And anyway, in this muddled message, none of that really matters because the solutions we're putting forward are so meek and mild, they won't tackle any of it. In fact, in many cases, including on race pay gap reporting, this report's recommendation was actually about stepping back from previous reports that had argued it should be mandatory. It's very similar in my book to some of the noise we hear about levelling up. Nobody, unless I've missed something, nobody's defined what levelling up is supposed to mean. And they're certainly not measuring it. So if you're not doing that, how on earth do you tackle it? In fact, on the contrary, what we know is that inequality between regions and nations is growing, and inequality within them is growing too. We've also seen the culture wars. You know, again, in my book, a fairly crude attempt to try and divide people against each other. Look at the issues that are chosen. It's not an accident. And I think for the trade union movement, our starting point always has to be that whatever race, religion, or background we come from, we believe that everybody deserves a decent job and the chance to earn a living in a way that allows you to bring up a family too. And we believe in the unity of working people because we know that that is key to winning a better deal. So that means that we oppose racism and at the same time, we find common cause between working people that can bring us together. Maybe we will talk later about what we think the government's strategy is, but what I do want to say is that I am very clear that strategy and those who propose it are not invincible. I think it's really important for us as a movement to celebrate the pushback there was to that Saul report, the solidarity there was between those of us who were rejecting it, the capacity for imagination that we have for a genuinely better future for all, and a genuine campaign to push back against racism, and also to recognise that those who oppose us have their own stresses and strains too. From a trade union perspective, for me, again, one important fundamental principle is that for us, this is about friendship between working people, but it is also about voice. We are not doing stuff just for working people. We are a movement that is of working people. And that's really important to me, because all my training is about the people we represent, the people we come from. It's about can do, that all of us have a contribution to make, and that has to be valued and voices have to be heard. It is about collectivism. It's about recognizing for us always that the best route to individual freedom is by joining together collectively. That's how we win equality, which is not just in pay and conditions, but in the way that people are treated and included at work. It is about education too. Again, I think this is more and more important, and it's important for us to send a message. We will not be divided along race lines. We will stick together and we will stick up for each other. And critically, Qudsi, a last word from me, it is about leadership by example. We cannot wag fingers at other people or lecture other people unless we are seen to be practicing what we preach. And I think all of us know that Black and ethnic minority people still more likely to join a union, but much less likely to be reflected in our leadership. And that has to change, because the way that we become stronger is by putting our own house in order, leading by example. That is the way we will win. Thank you, Qudsi.
Thank you so much, Frances. And thank you for the reminder. And it's always good to have a reminder of why we do what we do and why it's always necessary to make sure that the conversation isn't pushed out and isn't pushed aside. And speaking of people that won't be pushed out or pushed aside, I'm really pleased to introduce someone that I had the great pleasure of learning from for a long period of time, of what it is to go from being a non-racist to an anti-racist, and what that means. And that's Dr. Patrick Roach, General Secretary of the NASUWT and Chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force.
Well, thanks very much, Qudsi, and good evening, colleagues. I'm going to start my remarks by just talking a little bit about the facts as we know them. I mean, in the last year, we've all seen how our communities have been devastated by this deadly virus, which has triggered a financial crisis, financial insecurity for many families across the country, and of course, a deep economic crisis. But we also know that the pandemic has exposed a racial justice emergency. You know, last summer, I mean, let's not forget that just last summer, we saw that global movement demanding change, that Black Lives Matter movement, those protests worldwide in the wake of the racist killing of George Floyd. But actually, racism is being played out every day in our workplaces and in our communities. Racism, as Frances said, is real. And we know the evidence. We've all seen the evidence of Black and Asian workers up to 4 times more likely to die as a result of the coronavirus. And the statistics are also clear about the extent of racial segregation and racial injustice in our labour market. when you're looking for work, when you're seeking promotion, or just simply trying to keep a job. A third of Black workers say that they've been unfairly turned down for a job. Black workers are more likely to have been unfairly overlooked for a pay rise or promotion than their white colleagues. Black workers in London experience a 24% ethnicity pay gap. They're more likely to be on insecure employment contracts. Black women are around twice as likely as white workers to be employed in insecure jobs. Since the start of the pandemic, Black workers have been faced with fire and rehire at nearly twice the rate of white workers. And today, of course, the TUC evidence confirmed that Black workers were facing unemployment at a rate which is rising the fastest, 3 times faster than the unemployment rate for white workers. Young people from Black backgrounds are more likely to be unemployed than white workers at every level of qualification. And across the board, young people and Black workers in the UK have borne the brunt of job losses during the pandemic. In every industry where jobs are gone, Black workers have paid a higher price. And when Black workers have held on to their jobs, we also know that they're more likely to be working in low-paid, insecure jobs where they're more likely to be exposed to the coronavirus and more likely to die as a result. These are the facts, colleagues. It's not hype. It's not a figment of the imagination. It's the evidence of systemic racial inequality that's been experienced by Black workers. So it is simply outrageous that a government-led commission should seek to deny those facts and suggest that systemic and institutional racism doesn't exist. But that's what we've heard in the last few weeks. Now, last week in the Queen's speech, the government announced that they intend to come forward with a series of measures to address racial and ethnic disparities. Well, should we be worried? Will the government actually take the action that's necessary to tackle the important issues? The issues like creating the conditions in which the rights of all workers are guaranteed and respected, such as giving workers a voice individually and collectively through their trade unions and guaranteeing workers a seat at the bargaining table? Will government come forward with measures that are about ensuring that there's a statutory framework in place on equalities and ensuring that equalities duties are honoured in practice and not in the breach? Will government come forward with measures to ensure that employers can't hide behind the law and that they will be held to account? Colleagues, those are the issues that we need to be pressing for urgent and meaningful action, not an agenda that says that racism is down to a few bad apples or that racial disadvantage, economic and social exclusion are the fault of Black communities who have failed to take the opportunities available to them to get on in life. Because that's what we're being told by that government commission when it says, and I quote, that people from ethnic minority backgrounds have absorbed a fatalistic narrative. What else are we meant to think when the narrative from that commission is predicated on a colonial outlook, which says that Britain has nothing to learn from the rest of the world and that we're lucky to be here? What else are we meant to conclude from a government commission that itself has denied the existence of systemic and institutional racism? So where next for racial equality at work? Backwards to Sewell and the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, or forwards? Well, I say forwards, and our movement says forwards. Forwards by firstly being united in speaking out against injustice and against those who seek to turn back the clock, by being organised, by being clear that we have to campaign collectively and industrially, and that we need to be visible at all times. We have to tell it like it is. We have to reject the deniers of racism with the same conviction that we reject the politics of climate change deniers. We have to be clear that we're prepared to stand together and that we're prepared to show that leadership from the very top with a practical agenda that's targeted and delivered in practice. And we want that agenda, colleagues, to be set by our trade unions, and for us to ensure that our movement continues to campaign in the interests of all workers, black and white, campaigning for decent jobs and living standards. And that's what the TUC's Anti-Racism Task Force has been established to do. And I'm really proud to be chairing that, but I'm also particularly proud to have Francis, Gloria and Shav on board with regard to the work of that task force, working across the UK with union leaders and civil society organisations. Our anti-racism task force is determined to engage with black and white workers to bring forward a practical programme with measurable actions that will address the key issues being faced in the workplace. We intend to put racial justice at the heart of our organising, of our campaigning and our bargaining agendas. We intend to ensure that we really do lead by example, taking steps to set out a progressive agenda that will tackle racism at work and secure decent rights for all workers, whether that's calling for stronger legislation and enforcement to tackle racial discrimination and institutional racism, or action to tackle inequalities that deny opportunity through mandatory race pay gap reporting, or calling for greater protection for the right to safety at work, calling for stronger inspection and enforcement of rights at work, and ending the use of fire and rehire practices, banning 0 hours contracts, strengthening the rights of workers on temporary or insecure contracts. That's what we're about, but also about calling for the government to publish all of the equality impact assessments that it's undertaken related to its response to the pandemic. And that's what we're also about, campaigning to ensure that the forthcoming independent public inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic will actually address the issues of racial injustice head on and hold the government to account for its handling of the pandemic and how it's impacted on black workers and on black communities. And throughout the life of the task force, we're also going to be gathering research and intelligence, developing campaigning tools and resources, training our reps, building a new cadre of black reps across the movement, ensuring that our unions continue to be racial justice champions, that we have future leaders of our movement who not only look like us, but who have the courage, the confidence, the conviction to campaign and to speak out against racial injustice and discrimination in the workplace. And you know something else? We also want our work to connect with black workers everywhere, whether you're just starting out in your career or seeking work, whether you're in a union or not, and regardless of who you work for, our goal is that our union movement is there for you. So we ask you to join us and to join in. And we'll also be working with wider civil society organisations as part of a broader anti-racist coalition, pledging to take action to advance the interests of our members. Cudya said it in her introductory remarks, you know, it was 20 years ago that our movement embarked on the work of the Stephen Lawrence Task Group, and it made a real difference. But you know, the job wasn't done. Black workers are telling us now that they want our movement to be their voice. They want to see unions who are not afraid to speak out on the issues affecting them. They want to be part of a trade union movement where their voices will be sought, will be listened to and respected. And we'll demonstrate that we are listening, that we're prepared to take action, campaigning for change, delivering the change that our members want to see, refusing to stand by when white and black workers are pitched against each other, standing together, speaking out, rooting out racism within the workplace and within our movement. Colleagues, that's what we're about. It's about unity. It's about our strength. So let's work together and demand the change that we want to see. Forwards, not backwards, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Patrick. And thank you for setting the context of the journey we've been on and what still we've got ahead in terms of challenges. Can I please introduce Shavana Taj, General Secretary currently of the TUC Wales.
Thanks, Kutsia. We've heard a lot about what's happened at a England level, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done here in Wales. So here in Wales, we didn't actually really need to wait for the official ONS data to be examined to tell us that Black workers were dying in higher numbers and being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. We worked on the basis of the intel that we were receiving through our whistleblowing site, through our sectoral reports that we were getting from union reps, the BAME helpline that was set up by a third sector BME-led organisation, which the Wales TUC and affiliates were and still are supporting workers picking up on any employment matters, both for existing and for new joiners as well to the trade union movement. And through having that sort of direct line really into the heart of those workers' lived experiences, we quickly managed to collectively lobby the Welsh Government to prioritise racial justice where Black Lives Matter, and to accept that Wales is honestly not innocent when it comes to racism, and shifting us away from simply saying the right thing to actually doing the right thing. Over the course of devolution, many Welsh governments have worked hard to reduce inequalities wherever they exist. And we've had some progress being made in areas such as gender inequality, but we've never really touched the structural, deep-seated racism and discrimination that's been faced and is still being faced by Black people, by Black workers in the labour market in Wales. And because ultimately it's always been in the too hard to reach box, or as some would say, is going to lead us comfortable for change to happen, but a demanding and an organising to uplift the voices of those who have long been sidelined when it comes to decision making. That includes how public funds more often than not end up supporting labour exploitation, unfair work, a deepening of poor work conditions, which we've seen highlighted more recently in parts of social care that have been privatised, and other sectors as well, where we have a significantly high proportion of workers. We were in, I would say, in a stronger position here, because we did have and do still have a Labour socialist government at the helm of the pandemic. So we made sure that we didn't do what the UK government did with the Sewell report. Here, in response to lobbying led by Black-led organisations, supported by the Wales TUC, the First Minister decided to set up a BAME COVID-19 advisory group. There was one subgroup that focused on examining the immediate risk to BME social care workers during the pandemic. That led to us developing a self-assessment Welsh workforce risk assessment tool that was then rolled out across all workplaces. And then the other group that I was also personally a part of examined the socioeconomic factors which actually contributed to this disproportionate impact. And we know as trade unionists what those issues are. So we were very much at that decision-making table. So with the support and advice and the insights of these subgroups, the Welsh Government then worked in social partnership with employers in the public and private sector, the Wales TUC and the affiliates, to take immediate action to mitigate a lot of the disproportionate impact of COVID. And this included, setting up a freelancer fund, support for businesses and self-employed, because large proportions of workers, particularly BME workers, we know our taxi drivers here, for example, 85% of them are actually from BME backgrounds. They benefited from the support. We also introduced a culture contract to ensure the workers who are being employed by contractors that have been funded through Welsh Government, that they ensured that they're working to close the race pay gap and more. And we also made sure that social care workers, whether they were directly employed or otherwise, would be paid their full wage and not be left to rely on the awful statutory sick pay that we're all campaigning to improve. And so if people needed to self-isolate, those who were going to be on the front line, that they wouldn't be losing any pay if they needed a time off, whether that's to be vaccinated or to get a COVID test. And also we made sure that asylum seekers were able to access medical support throughout the pandemic, and that they weren't being left to sort of fight it alone. We've been working very closely with our affiliates and third sector BME organizations, addressing so many of the complex issues that are facing Black workers, union members and non-members. And we also made sure that we're supporting family justice campaigns, including the Justice for Christopher Kapesa campaign, the Free Sianda campaign, the Justice for Mahmoud Hassan and Moeed Bashir as well. Because, you know, we must remember always that Black workers are members of their own communities too, just as white workers are theirs. And we need to be building our branches so that they have that same sense of community and pride, where we are all equally responsible for supporting and lifting each other up and protecting our rights at work, and that we're demanding pay justice and more. The reality is the split in our labour market is becoming increasingly apparent. You've had some of the data quoted to you already. We know that there was only around a third of people who actually were working from home during this pandemic. And yet it's often discussed like the majority of workers were working from home. We know definitely for sure that BME workers, the majority of them were definitely out there, whilst others weren't, doing often many of those jobs where they don't have a written contract, they're being paid on a daily basis, they don't even know what their classification is. Are they employed or are they self-employed? Do I get sick pay? Do I not? What are my employment rights? So again, we worked with the Welsh Government to ensure that there was a Know Your Rights campaign, and that's something that we are still working through. And some of the other stuff that we did differently here was we managed to work with government to set up a National Health and Safety Forum that included enforcement agencies, local government, business reps, union voices as well. We also worked with several women's organizations to ensure that we had properly support available for cases of violence against women and domestic abuse and sexual violence. When it came to the test and trace services and the app as well, we made sure that there were BME outreach workers within our communities across Wales. And we also introduced, we've also had agreement that we are going to be introducing Black history, not only into our school curriculum, but we're also looking at ways to improve adult education when it comes to Black history. Now, the other way that we are moving things along is that we have developed a race equality action plan that's now up for consultation. And we've ensured that there's funding available so that people, particularly Black-led organizations, trade union groups, can apply for that funding if they need it, so they can help collate those responses, so that we can ensure that BME voices are being included when those decisions are being reached. As far as policy issues are concerned, we want to make sure that we're amplifying the workers, Black workers' voices across all public bodies in Wales through its procurement provisions. Work to use the power of the public purse to influence those types of employment practices in the private sector. We are in the process of introducing a social partnership and procurement bill as well. And a part of that is specifically around the Fair Work agenda. But overall, it represents us with a real unique opportunity to ensure that in Wales, we start to call back some of the control that has been completely taken away from us over the last 40 years. So we want to use this as a means to enhance the ability of unions to make sure the Black and white trade union voices are heard when decisions are being taken. And that we are also now in the process of working with government to ensure the scoping out of a race disparity unit, making sure that the Race Equality Action Plan in Wales is driving equality. That includes mandatory race reporting and closing the pay gap, and also carefully considering what we can do around compliance and enforcement. Because ultimately, if you do not have any enforcement, we know that all of these things completely fall apart. There's other things that we're doing around public appointments as well, making sure that we're developing a high-level leadership training program for Black and minority ethnic and disabled people in Wales as well. And of course, we're not only looking to government and looking to employers for these answers, we are also calling on all trade union leaders, as we are across the whole of the UK, to pledge to commit to positive and constructive action. That's what this has got to be about. This has got to be action driven to ensure that we drive racism and race inequality out of our country once and for all, and that we are taking a very open and visible stance against inequality wherever we see it, wherever we experience it. We should no longer be leaving it to chance. We shouldn't be leaving it to somebody else to do. And it's only then that we are going to get ourselves into a position where we can genuinely become anti-racist in everything that we do. So, you know, in Wales, we are committed to becoming an anti-racist Wales. We've just had our elections here as well. The government is committed to that. There are lots of, unfortunately, devolution doesn't give us all the powers that we need to make that happen. So we have to work collectively as a union movement to be pressing the UK government as well, so that we can make all of this happen and make those changes in reality. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shav. I'm always minded to think, whilst there's still so much to do, how much can be achieved when the atmosphere is less hostile and where there is a real appetite for change and the powers given, or taken, should I say, by the movement to drive that change forward. I'm going to introduce Gloria Mills now, and Gloria will come and she will speak, and she will always do what she always does, which is take me from a place of active listening to quite angry participation. So Gloria, over to you. And Gloria is the chair of our Race Relations Committee and National Officer for Unison.
Thank you, Coetzee. And just to say good evening to everyone, comrades, friends and colleagues. I'm pleased to be able to say a few words today on this issue in terms of, you know, where next in terms of employment. And I want to actually start from where Shavana left off, because people who know me know that I'm an action-driven person. I want to see real outcome and results that make a substantive and transformational difference. And I need to see a program and a strategy that works and that, you know, takes us beyond the rhetoric and begin to change and transform people's lives. So I want to first of all say that, you know, we are meeting a week before the anniversary of the brutal murder of George Floyd. And I want to recognize the work that has been done by the Black Lives Matter movement. They have been one of the single most important protest movement this century, changing the discourse and the narrative on racism across the globe. But more importantly, they have been a game changer in highlighting the glaring racial disparities and racial injustice experienced daily in all areas of economic, civil, political, social life of Black people. But, you know, it shouldn't actually take the brutal murder of Black men and women for Black people to get action on racial injustice. It is such a scandal. It is unconscionable that so many Black people have to pay the ultimate price in order for us to get a little step change in some areas. And it's not even substantial change that recognizes our humanity. In fact, it continues to defile our human rights and treat us as human beings. So I want to say, you know, the Sewell report is so wrong on institutional racism and systemic discrimination, because it's not just about individuals, but the policies, the practices, and the culture that leads to this cycle of discrimination, where you have a culture of impunity because people know that they can discriminate, that they can practice racism, and that the institution will use its powers, its full might, to actually close ranks and to protect them. And that is what we are facing, and that's what the Black Lives Matter movement actually exposed. So the Sewell report, this is the last you will hear from me about it because it's gone into my political sewer. I've got no time for it. You know, people are not going to deny us our daily experience of racism. The racism deniers are not going to rewrite our history, and neither are they going to dismiss it that we have a chip on our shoulder. You know, we have over 400-500 years of, you know, brutal repression, oppression, suppression, whatever you call it. So I want to say that we need to challenge the culture in institutions where people believe that they can discriminate and get away with racism with impunity. And the reason we need to do this is that as trade unions, we need to recognize that racism is a system of exploitation that sustains a capitalist system that benefits people who use unfettered abuse of corporate power and control in order to sustain profits. They have institutions have a vested interest, and the individuals who deny institutional racism have a vested interest in an economic model that's based on the exploitation of labor, exploiting in the main Black workers. I mean, what was slavery about? There was no, slavery. Black our forefathers and mothers, have not had reparation. It was on wage labor, and so we need to understand the system that we are dealing with. It's a very powerful system that will bear down on trade unions, and that's why union busting is so important for corporate organization. Undermining trade union and workers' rights is what corporations do, is what institutions do, because they do not want fairness. And our agenda must be to put fairness at the heart of everything we do. Equality and fairness must be at the heart of any leveling up agenda and the building back better strategy. Now, the Tories have stolen our agenda on leveling up. They will not teach me anything about leveling up. In fact, we have had, since 1979, over 40 years of leveling down. Let us understand that. And it has been the introduction of compulsory competitive tendering. They leveled down on women's jobs, on Black workers' jobs. They privatize them, they outsource it, they drive down pay, conditions in social care, in all of the sectors. So leveling up is a good soundbite, but if you look at their record does not support their rhetoric. And we must take this agenda back, because leveling up is not their agenda. Everything that they have done, you just have to look at what happened during the austerity measures that they implemented. So it's a good soundbite, but we have to fight back by putting out the real narrative in terms of what is happening. And the Queen's speech includes measures to tackle racial disparities, and I don't really know what that means in practice. But what I do know we need to shift the dial in terms of what is happening in this country. We need to have concrete measures, structural change that shift the dial in favor of fairness and equality. And we need a radical approach to close the employment and the unemployment gaps. So we have to remold the political landscape to make it fairer, because we have seen in the recent elections the fact that this talk of leveling up is gaining such resonance, but it does not really have any substance. So we have to change the narrative to make sure that we remold the political landscape, we remold the agenda, and we reshape this agenda so that it includes real fairness and access to all of the opportunities that people are being denied. So we know Black workers have been denied access to training for years, and we know that they have been denied equal pay. And we need to take urgent action to close the racial pay gap. I'm not calling it an ethnicity pay gap. It's a racial pay gap. If you are Black, you are paid less in a number of areas. And we need to face up to it. This is about racism. 1.9 million Black workers are shortchanged by 3.2 billion pounds less every year than their white counterparts. we don't need to wait. I've always said this, you know, you don't need to wait for mandatory pay audits. You can use the law as it is at the moment and bring a race discrimination case. So I would like unions to try looking at some of the sectors where you have these gaps that the ONS figures have already told us where those gaps are, where they exist, and to start closing some of those loopholes by bringing some discrimination cases, race discrimination cases. You don't have to wait. You can bring the test cases now. You know, I might do a crowdfunder and bring a few test cases, and, you know, that might expedite this mandatory pay auditing. But we don't need to wait for that. You know, it's really selling Black workers short. So we need to have the test cases. We need the lawyers to be on the cases. We did this, you know, 25 years ago when we started dealing with equal pay cases. So it's part of our strategy, as I've said in the past, to educate, to negotiate, and to litigate. So every trade union negotiating team should have racial and ethnicity pay gaps on the agenda with employers. It should be part of the negotiating agenda. We should also be looking at issues around recruitment and retention from every area of the employment process, from recruitment to redundancy, tainted with discrimination, tainted with racial bias, and we need to change that. But we also need to have a campaigning element to it. We want the enactment of the socio-economic duty, the Section 1 Equality Act 2010 duty that the government failed to implement. So we need a campaigning agenda that forces action on that. We need to reenact, I should say, the specific employment provisions in the public sector equality duty so that Black workers can have a fair chance of good quality employment. We need to reinstate the equality impact assessments in England, I should say. And also we need to have a new race equality jobs guarantee for young Black people to have jobs in apprenticeship and to have good quality jobs in the green and the digital sectors. I think, you know, we need to be specific and we need to use positive action and positive discrimination measures that are in the Equality Act that allow us to take action. So we need to stop talking a good talk on racism, and we need to do what trade unions do best, and that is campaign and negotiate, educate, and litigate, because we have to end the precarity and the poverty that keep Black people impoverished. So we need a job guarantee. We need including permanent jobs, training for good quality jobs, green jobs, and jobs in the digital and new technology sector. We also need jobs that pay people the wage that they should be getting, equal pay for work of equal value, and that applies in every area. And we must also ensure that one of the things we must do as trade unionists is to expose the discrimination that we see happening in the workplace. And that means, you know, we need to start raising those issues, raising the grievances, registering the collective disputes in order to change the culture inside those institutions that continue to deny that they have a problem with racism. You know, a lot of institutions are shut out, Black workers, sorry, are shut out from them. They're closed institutions. And if you look at them, you know, you don't have Black people at any level in those organizations. So we need the trade union movement to begin to fight on an agenda that will value all of the workers in the economy, particularly bringing the new people in the gig economy. I think we need to bring them into the trade union movement. We need to organize them. We need to make sure that they're trained, and we need to give them the support that they need. But, you know, we need to have a new group of trade union leaders trained up in every area and accredited to go into the workplace and do the organization. We cannot wait for this. You know, this should be happening now. We need to give people the 5-day courses. They can, I'm sure, do them in chunks over the next 3 or 4 months. They can do them online, and then they can have the accreditation, and they can get in there in the summer, in the autumn, and they can start, you know, organizing people, mobilizing them, recruiting them, and building a trade union movement that's very strong, because we need to build trade union density and high membership numbers if we are going to use our collective bargaining strength, you know, to move to a position of power where we hold employers and hold unions to account. So at the heart of this must be health and safety, one of the biggest areas we can tackle inequalities, and one of the biggest areas where we can have a new generation of trade unionists at the negotiating table, doing the job that needs to be done in terms of dealing with all of the areas of disproportionality from COVID, in terms of disabled workers, women workers, young workers, older workers, Black workers. So it's LGBT plus workers. It's really important that we do have these concrete measures, these structural changes that are needed to shift this dial in favor of fairness and equality. And please do not waste time giving credibility to this Sewell report. You know, it is the biggest distraction that we are seeing now, and it is being done to poison and pollute public opinion for political advantage and electoral gain. And it's pitting Black and white working class people against each other in terms of education, in terms of opportunities. And that's what the Tories wants to fight on. They have nothing else that they can fight on apart from saying they will level up and pitting people against each other. So we as a trade union movement must fight back with an alternative strategy, an alternative agenda, and we must put workers at the heart of that in challenging institutional racism, economic exploitation, and also economic and racial injustice. And I think, you know, we could work together with the Black Lives Matter movement to begin to be that mass political protest movement of this century, but also to build a collective mass movement that regain trade union power and negotiating strength. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. The steady stream of questions that we had coming in absolutely went through the roof, Gloria, once you started speaking. And we're going to take some of those questions now. And I think a question that we've had that's been a reoccurring theme is, what do unions need to do now to get Black leaders, to increase Black representation, to get Black people in power to challenge and hold? And where some of those programs and systems already exist, well, how do they need to change to break through the glass ceiling? Francis, we'll start with you on that one.
I'm just getting the mute button sorted out. I think Gloria in particular has made the case for doing a big campaign in terms of recruiting new blood into our reps and activists base. And, you know, so number one, I want to make sure that every single union affiliated to the TUC is signed up to play its part to that. Obviously, there is lots of good work out there already, but I think maybe what's different is that I think there's more that we could do to build power networks and bases, you know, so that people don't feel isolated, so they do feel supported, and so people feel part of a bigger movement, which is about transforming the face and the body of the trade union movement. The other thing, this is a personal view, others may disagree, but I always have this thing in lots of areas, in fact, that in many organisations, it feels like there's an invisible rule book that you never get to see, and that somebody else is writing. And sometimes those rules get changed just when you feel like you've learned what it's about. The rules get changed, and it's like, you know, you feel on the outside again. And so I have kind of a very strong personal instinct about needing to open up that invisible rule book in very practical ways. If I'm a rep, how do I become a convener? How do I even think about whether I'd want to go for a full-time officer job? How do I get elected? What kind of organizational machine would I need to build to do that? You know, all of those sorts of issues. I think our invisible rule books were written a very long time ago by a certain group. And I think it's about time in the 21st century that we open them up, we rewrite them with everybody having their hands on the pen.
Thanks, Lester. Thank you for that, Francis. Patrick, as chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force, can I ask you to come in on that one as well, please?
Yeah, well, I certainly concur with Francis's remarks there on the invisible rule book. Even when we open that up, it seems there's another rule book that we didn't know existed. So we also have to deal with that one as well. And we have to. We also have to. You know, we have to protect our Black trade union leaders as well, because, you know, the invisible rule book also operates on the basis of, you know, what it does to those who have the temerity, dare I say it, to think that they could lead either a branch, a union, or indeed across the movement. So I think we've got to think about that as well. I think, though, that it does require, and I said it earlier about leadership, the importance of leadership, and for leadership to be challenged and to be put on the spot. We're saying that these things are important for employers and for government out there, then they're important for us as unions as well. And, you know, Gloria spoke very passionately about positive action, and indeed even used the expression positive discrimination. By the way, Gloria, I agree with you. It's time for that. It's time for those kinds of radical measures, you know, and it's important that whilst we respect and protect our democracy as trade unions, that we've also got to recognise that democracy means nothing unless it's about inclusivity as well. And so, you know, we've got to think very radically about the kinds of measures that can be introduced. That new cadre of Black trade union organisers and activists is going to be part of that. And I do very much hope that as a result of the work of the Anti-Racism Task Force, that we'll see that new cadre of Black trade union activists coming forward. But you know what? It requires unions to step up and to make that happen, to create the conditions for that to happen, to encourage their Black members to be able to participate and to access those programs. That may actually mean giving up some of the very valuable resources that trade unions hang on to, including, you know, facilities time, to enable that to happen. If we're serious about this, then we're going to have to put down those kinds of challenges to ourselves as a movement to bring about the change that we want to see. Can I just say that there's an existential issue here as well? And, you know, Black workers have played an enormous role in our British trade union movement. They've been loyal supporters and contributors to our movement. They've not often asked a lot of our movement, it has to be said. And sometimes, you know, they found that the movement has fallen short of their relatively modest expectations. But if as a movement, we fail to deliver and to change ourselves, There's no way that black workers are going to hang around. They're either not going to be in unions or they're going to form their alternative organizations. And Gloria put it extremely well, actually. We saw actually activism in the form that trade unions aspire to, not just in this country, but around the world. We saw it in the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of that was with trade unions, but a lot of it was despite trade unions. Yeah, campaigning for change, organizing for change, demanding that change. Well, actually, I see no reason why we cannot connect with the Black Lives Matter movement and that we learn from that movement. But fundamentally, what that requires is radicalism of thought and of practice. It means doing things very differently, and it means focusing on concrete action, Gloria's words, concrete action which delivers real change for Black workers and Black communities.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And I think that's a good point to address a question that's come up a few times about what that concrete action, what that concrete change looks like. And, you know, we the movement know that change needs to come. We know that change will have an impact. And Shav, I'm going to bring you in because, you know, you are at the heart of a lot of change that happens and to talk really about what it is that brings about that change, because I think, you know, we're ready and we're waiting. So what do we need to do?
I think a lot of this goes back to the points that Patrick was just making about the invisible rules. And I think that sometimes what ends up happening, and I'll talk about Black leadership here, is that the fact of the matter is there's few and far between of us that exist in the first place. And where we do exist, there is, I would say personally, probably not enough support given to people who are in those positions. And sometimes there's this misunderstanding that we may have all the answers when actually we don't. But we also then need the protection when we are being attacked, because we are being bold and because we are being radical and because we are pushing the boundaries and because we are working with Black-led organizations that are outside of our traditional sort of trade union structures. One of the things that I would say is going forward, you know, one of my trade union sisters, Lynn Henderson, kind of coined this term of step aside brother, Scottish trade union sister. And what that really means is that we are asking our trade union brothers, predominantly white brothers within those positions, to step aside and to make space for women to come forward. But actually, sometimes we need our white sisters to step aside and make space for black workers, for Black union leaders to come forward as well, and to be at the helm of those decision making, because we, you know, it shouldn't just be a case of we are only there to be interested in issues of racial justice. We are more than capable of negotiating on lots of different matters and leading campaigns on lots of different matters as well. So it is about an issue of making that space. But when it comes to trade union elections and so forth, and when you look at the Labour Party, for example, a lot of the issues that exist within the Labour Party in terms of Black representation, we see a lot of that sort of emulated within the trade union movement as well. And we often kind of think that we're, you know, we sometimes see ourselves as a bit special and kind of outside of that because we represent the masses, yeah, and we're kind of like outside of any of the politics because we just focus on the employment issues. But that's not necessarily the truth. So this is going to be, we're going to have to go on a bit of a journey, and we're going to have to like unravel a lot during this process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it is going to take some real commitment from people to make space and to sometimes, as Patrick says, give up. If it is, and sometimes it is about fighting for resources. Where do you put those union resources? Because we have seen spikes in membership density, but equally, as furlough goes and the job losses hit, potentially that membership that we've seen come up potentially could reduce. Unions are then looking at their resources, and whilst at the moment they are committed to, anti-racist work, racial, addressing racial inequality, that might be something that all of a sudden then falls down the priority list as well. So the task force in itself has got a big job to do, but it also then, needs to take a step back and understand that, I think some of the comments here, there's somebody that said about, putting their money where their mouth is that sort of thing, really. I'll support the position that Patrick, the point that Patrick made around Black workers will just set up their own union. I have had so many, particularly young Black activists who are active within Black Lives Matter, who have said, Shav, you know what? Work with us. We'll set about our own union. I know you know other Black leaders within the union movement. Let's do it ourselves. Why can't we do it? We don't need them. We'll make our own rules and we'll do it our way, because we've already shown that we can do it. We don't need to wait for this to happen. So there is that's the reality. That's the space that we're currently in.
Thank you so much, Shav, and thank you for outlining those issues, especially, what needs to be done, and more importantly, what the barriers are, what's going on out there and what is acting as blockers. This is a really interesting question, especially when we are actively challenging the government who are trying to pit Black working people against white working people, trying to create a hierarchy of class and of race. And the question is, how do we fit things like positive discrimination and positive action with equality of opportunity? And how do we make it so that it works and it doesn't disadvantage anybody, and that we really are seeking a fair deal for everybody? Glory, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, well, I want to say two things on this. In terms of the glass ceiling, I just want to say that it's set so low for Black workers and for Black people. Many are still stuck to the concrete floor. People are not moving up. They're not getting opportunities. They're being denied opportunities. And, the people who get opportunities who are denied it, and I said an act of omission is an act of discrimination. And, when you say, well, you've been omitted from being trained, then, actions taken. But I want to say, in terms of this glass ceiling, my union, and I want to really say this, and it links into this point about, positive discrimination and making sure people are treated equally. Now, when I became Director of Equalities, my organization set up a trainee officer scheme. It was to prepare the next generation of trade union leaders. Now that scheme, gave people the skills and the competencies in every aspect of the core competencies that they need to become a trade union officer, the training and qualifications that they need. Because what we saw is that men gained a lot of their competencies after 20 years of experience. And in order to level up, you can do that through training. And we trained about 40 people. It included women, young people at the time, Black people. And I should say, a generation later, they're all in senior position of leadership running my union. So it's really important to show that that was a very groundbreaking job at the time. And I will give personal thanks to my colleague, Tom Sawyer, who actually gave the support to make sure that that happened. Because you do need to have the support from the leadership at the top in order to make sure these things happen. But what we did, having trained everyone, people were able to compete on an equal basis when the vacancies came up. So no one was actually given any preferential positive discrimination favorite or preferential treatment, because what happened, they all had the same skills and competency to apply for the jobs and to be treated and to be appointed on an equal basis. And the difference is that in some areas where you already had 100%, say, white male, and you had women who came in and they were equally competent and trained up, then you can, you know, the law allows you to do it on that positive discrimination or positive action. You could say, well, no, we are not going to continue with 100%, but, you know, we will have 98% white male and 2% white female. That's how it was done. So it's about recognizing that, you know, people are being appointed on merit. It is not machine politics that appointing. You know, we know a lot of people tell us that they're there on merit, but I can tell you now, they're not there on merit. They're there because of the old boy network. They're there because of the machine politics, and they're there because of the old school tie. So, you know, we see it, and they can't tell us any differently, but the way you level up in a situation like that is to do those competency-based training and give everyone an equal opportunity to compete for vacant jobs when they come up. And that's what my union did. And, you know, it has worked and it has benefited male, female, young, old. People have had an opportunity to compete on an equal basis. So unions could do it. We know how to do it. And we know how to promote that fairness of opportunity without discriminating against people. But, you know, if you already have, you know, overrepresentation of one group and everyone is competent, then, you know, you are allowed to give a competent job to someone who might be of a different race or who might be younger or who might be a woman instead of a man. You know, that's what the law allows. You know, you're not giving a less qualified person the job. You are giving an equally qualified person the job, but you are just redressing some of those disadvantages. So that's how it's done. And it's done in a fair and ethical way. And as trade unionists, we wouldn't want it to be done any other way except with good conscience, because I would not want someone who is appointed and cannot do the job and letting down workers every day. You know, that's not what we are about. We are about doing it right and doing it fairly, but making sure we give equal chances and opportunities to people who can compete on merit. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gloria, and thank you for making that clarification, because I do think people can sometimes get confused between what it actually means. And I'm always reminded of what Francis and Patrick alluded to. You know, it's about, all I want to do is see the rule book. Let me just see the real rule book, and then let me just see the real rule book, and let me just see the real rule book, so I know what the playing field is and how we level it and how I can navigate, you know. So thank you for that. We are fast running out of time. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to come back to our speakers with some closing remarks. And I'm really sorry if your question wasn't addressed directly. Lester and I, we will take the questions and we will collate them. So this is a really, really interesting question. It's an interesting point, which is the trade union movement needs to prove themselves worthy and useful to cross-population community movements. And it goes on to name some. So how do we reach activists? How do we reach those with shared goals? And how do we reach activists who are disenfranchised, who are disengaged? How do we rally everyone behind what is ultimately the right thing to be rallied behind? And Patrick, I am looking directly at you as I am asking this question. Of course.
That's okay. I can't tell on this screen who you're looking at, but that's great. Well, I think we do what we've just been discussing, actually. That is connecting our agenda, our issues as unions. Of course, we hear about our members and their experience in the world of work, but we connect that to the realities of our members' lives. Our members are not, you know, simply workers. You know, they are members of the community. They are voters. They are, you know, users of public services. They are, you know, parents and carers. They are family members. How do we connect with those issues? It seems to me is also important, isn't it? Isn't it interesting that in the context of, you know, the Westminster government's programme for government for the next period in the Queen's speech, that we had so little that was actually said about some of the important issues impacting on our members, on working people. We had nothing on employment rights, by the way, and despite the fact that there were promises that we were going to be seeing something in that area to actually address some of the scandalous practices that we're seeing out there in the labour market, which again impact on black workers, but not exclusively on black workers. They impact on the generality of workers, leaving open the scope for greater precarious employment and worker exploitation. But we saw also in the Queen's speech just a passing reference to, you know, a programme of measures on race and ethnic disparities. But what we did see in the Queen's speech was a very clear commitment to legislation on immigration, on voter ID, on policing and crime and sentencing. Now, all of that is about measures which impact on us, not just as workers, but as, you know, members of our communities, as parents and carers, as all the things I've just been mentioning. So how we make those connections, I think, as a union movement and as unions themselves really does matter. You know, I represent and I lead a teachers' union. Yeah, that's what the NSWT is about. If we don't connect as a union to the lived experience of our members, including our black members, whose own children may have an experience in schools which is frankly not always the greatest, where children might find that they are disproportionately more likely to be excluded from school. We have to connect with those issues just as much as we have to connect with the reality of the issue of where are the black leaders in our school system. We have to connect with the issues about why is it that black teachers find themselves disproportionately more likely to be subject to competency or disciplinary procedures. All of that matters. So we have to actively and proactively connect our bargaining agenda with a wider policy and social agenda, so that we are making that connection between labour rights and wider civil rights, because that's what our members are telling us that they want their unions, our unions, to be about.
Thank you, Patrick. Francis, can I bring you in on that one as well? Oh, Francis is on mute.
On reaching activists in allied campaigns.
Yes, and on and also on, you know, what you identified earlier, because I think the two things are linked together around the rule book and around, because one of those directly links to the other as well.
Okay, the first thing I'd say is I don't think there are any shortcuts. You know, we know those of us who are committed to the equality agenda across the board, that it's like you're putting in a double or triple shift, and you know, it's not fair, but I think the reality is that there aren't shortcuts on this. I would kind of point out that there is machinery in place. So, you know, I think it is people worth knowing that, for example, the TUC convenes networks of the major national anti-racist groups like Stand Up to Racism and Hope Not Hate and Searchlight, you know, that kind of is in place and could be grown and supported. It's also true at the other end of the spectrum. You know, we've done the analysis on this. Trade union reps much more likely to be involved in community campaigns and action than anybody else, whether that's anti-racist campaigns, tenants campaigns, or running the local football team. You know, that is a massive source of activism and networking beyond the workplace. And it's kind of recognizing, I mean, I always like the discipline of organising, because I believe that we're no use to anybody if we don't grow as a trade union movement within workplaces. That's where we draw our power from. And if we're going to share power, we've got to build it to do that. You know, our real contribution to the wider anti-racist movement is by making our own organisations as big and strong as possible. But I also think that we have to kind of build those relationships at all levels, to have those conversations, to build friendships beyond the workplace, because our lives don't just stop when we clock off. You know, and the way our lives are shaped isn't totally all happening within the workplace, as many of us know. So I think it is important to build those bridges. I think it's important to use the machines that we've already got there, including our regional structures and local structures and branch structures. But we do also need to move beyond those boundaries if we're going to make the difference we want to see.
Thank you so much, Frances. And I think that's a really good point for us to sum up today, and for any final thoughts we have. And I'll go around to everyone, and Frances, I will finish with you again, so you're not put on the spot twice in very, very short space. Shab, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Sorry, Cudzi, I wasn't quite sure what it was that you wanted me to...
Just to sum up, really, and what your final thoughts were.
I think my final thoughts are very much around some of the points that I've already made. This isn't going to be something that we're going to solve overnight. I think it's going to take a lot of work. I think as trade unionists, we never clock off, do we really, Frances? Frances talked about clocking off. We never do. It never happens. We all know, each and every one of us, you know, like, for example, I live very close to our local school. So there isn't a day that somebody doesn't ask me a question about, you know, one issue or the other, or stop me in the street, or, you know, try and contact me and stuff. So we're always gonna be doing that. I think that the points around labour and civil rights go in hand. I think that there is more and more of a need for us to be very much in the forefront of those types of campaigns. I think some of the work that the TUC did, particularly around women who were, you know, homeschooling at the time, but still working from home, all the work that we've done around pregnant and screwed, you know, all the work that we've been doing to highlight how Black women are, you know, are more likely to die in childbirth, for example. All of these different types of issues, including all of the issues around housing, all of these things are going to become even more prominent as furlough ends. So it's not just going to be around ending 0-hour contracts, for example. It is going to be about the fact that these jobs are going to be going, things are set to get worse, and how is it going to affect people in their daily lives? What are the repercussions of not having that wage come through the door? How does that affect people? How does that affect their families? How does it affect their local communities? So we've just really got to be at the, you know, we've got to continue building those relationships, and we just have to, at every given moment in time, encourage every single person out there that's a worker to join a trade union. If they've never been one and never been a member before, or you've had a bad experience, like, just join a union. That is my key message always. Join a union and get active in that union as well, regardless of how hard it is. And I also think that maybe there's a role here for something for the TUC to consider as well, because one of the things that we often hear is people who've had bad experiences when they've been a member of a union, where maybe they feel that their case hasn't been properly, they haven't been properly represented, or there's been an issue. So in the same way as we kind of do all the dispute resolution stuff between inter-union relations, maybe there's a role there for us to play. I don't know. Or maybe we just leave it to the individual unions, but then we leave it to the individual unions and then nothing kind of happens and we keep getting the same thing time and time again. So I think that maybe that's something for the task force to you know, kind of consider possibly. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shav. I think there's a role there for BME networks. What I think should be going on. Patrick, can I bring you in, please? And sorry to be the teacher here, but we are on the clock. So if you could keep it brief, thank you.
Okay, I will keep it brief because I think Shav in her summing up said a lot of frankly what I could have said. I just mentioned the important role that we play as unions and as a movement, both as trade unions and as wider civil society organisations, in keeping race on the agenda. You know, 12 months ago, when many of our unions, mine included, were demanding that the government actually, you know, tell us about the race equality impact of its emergency measures, and it told us that it's not in the public interest to publish that information. Quite a deplorable response. Roll forward 12 months and you've got, you know, the report of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, which takes a more aggressive line by actually saying that actually racism, systemic racism, institutional racism doesn't exist. In other words, it's not in the public interest. Well, it's our job to ensure that it is in the public interest, that that racial justice is kept on the table, that it remains on the agenda, and that we continue to fight for this, because this is important, not only in the context of what's happening to Black workers in this country, but actually in exposing the treatment of all workers who are subject to precarious employment, to temporary contracts, to low pay, to a lack of support and protection if things go wrong, and particularly if they become unemployed. This is something that matters to all workers, and it's for our movement, our wider movement, to continue to keep that on the agenda and to continue to fight for it. Thanks, Kudsia.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Gloria?
Yeah, well, I just want to say two things on this. The activist is the key. They're the glue that holds the union together. Now, you know, one of the things that I say, you know, you actually ignore the activists at your peril, because if a member is satisfied with an activist, every activist recruits 20 more members. So it's really important, you know. I don't think it's we could have meetings in my organization. We do a meeting with our activists every 2 or 3 months, or twice a year, you know, to give them support, to find out what actually the big issues are. One of the things I learned is, you know, I am always open to activists. I spent all my time at St. Thomas's Hospital, you know, at midnight having meetings with nurses when I was in the when I worked in you know, it's about meeting members where they are, not letting them come to you. And I think it's really important we do that. So we need our activists. They're the beating heart of our union, but also we need to get the message out. Being in a trade union matters. You know, we don't say that enough. We say to people, join. They say, Gloria, what am I joining for? What am I getting for it? So we have to be selling what we're about. We exist to counter as a counterbalance to the unfettered abuse of management and corporate power. We protect people's interests at the place of work. We give them the dignity that they need. So I think it's really important that we have a retention strategy as well as a recruitment strategy. We explain it. And part of the recruitment strategy is that, you know, twice a year, you phone the member up, a new member that's joined, and you say, how are you finding it in the union? Do you have any issues? Are there any problems we could help you with? That's what it's about. It's about relationship building. You go in and you get Nectar card, Tesco card, Club card, everything. You need to have a relationship. For heaven's sake, I say, it's not a transactional interaction. It's a relationship you build. You go from a member to an activist and then to leaders. You know, it's a pyramid structure you build. And once members are satisfied with the activists, they recruit another 20 members. The job's done for you. So I would say to the people who run, who duck and dive from activists, please embrace them. They phone me 24/7. I answer or I text them. And in terms of racism, my union has a race protocol. We introduced this about 15 years ago. So if members are unhappy with the response they have from us, they can see one of our lawyers, and the lawyers will go through all of the cases with them and go through the merits or the demerits of the case, and that the member feel confident that they are in a union that is supporting them. And we need to change that culture. When people try to contact us, nobody responds. You know, if people try to contact someone and they tell me nobody responds, you know, they will have to answer why they don't respond. We have to say, it is like, you know, it's marketing as well. It's good relationship building. So look at all the supermarkets, how they follow you up if you stop going, they send you vouchers and everything. We have to be in that terrain. You know, you cannot expect people to join and then, you know, you don't contact them and you're not in contact with them, or you send them a text or something just to say, are you okay? Is the union doing enough for you? So we need to build the union, build our power, build our strength, build our density in the workplace. And I tell you, if we start walking the workplace, the employers and the government will really know we mean business, and that they are not going to get away with any of their nonsense in terms of 0-hour contracts and outsourcing and all the other things.
Thank you so much, Gloria. And I think that emphasis on meeting people where they are and realizing that the relationship with the trade union and being part of a trade union is not a transactional relationship is really at the heart of our movement, and then mobilizing that. So thank you so much. And with the last word, Frances O'Grady.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Kudsia. I think I want to say I am really, really proud of the trade union movement, particularly during this crisis. That if I think about everything that Gloria and other unions have done, key workers unions for key workers, I know it's made a difference. I know it's protected livelihoods. It's protected people's safety. It has exposed and dealt with injustice. So I think about that Uber case and who benefited from that, and the fact that only a union with union resources could pursue that litigation strategy. Or I think about our unions in transport, where lots of Black and ethnic minority people are employed, and the difference that they make through being prepared to stand up and say enough is enough. So I am very, very proud of what our unions achieve. But I think the goal that we have, for me anyway, is to build an anti-racist majority across our trade union movement, across our workplaces, and then across the entire world of work. That is our goal. And we have that goal not just because, you know, it's a justice issue or a moral issue, it's because we know that that is the way to build workers' power and to make a difference to the working people we represent. And that's why I also think it's really important that when we think about how we best do that, we know that banning 0 hours, banning fire and rehire, winning dignity at work benefits all workers, but we know that it will especially benefit those who, Black and ethnic minority workers and lots of other workers too, who are locked into that extreme exploitation. But we all have an interest. We all have an interest. We all have an interest in opposing racism, because that is designed to divide us. Our interest is in unity, looking out for each other, sticking by each other, learning from each other. And just the last thing I would say, which is more for myself, as if you like, the organizer bit of me, is that as a union movement, we also have to have the humility to listen. So I may think that, you know, pay or whatever it might be is wrong. But listen, the more that we've listened to workers who are not yet in our movement, in this task group, they tell us about the things that matter to them, whether that's, you know, cancellation of shifts without compensation, or whether people sit next to you in the canteen, all sorts of issues that I think certainly I need to listen and learn from, because ultimately this movement, we are a democratic movement, we are a movement of workers, and it is workers who are going to have to shape our future. And we have to be there together, but we have to learn to listen too. And if we're going to grow the movement, we need to listen to workers within our ranks, but also those we aim to organise. And I'm confident we can do that.
Thank you so much, Frances, for those strong and impassioned words. And you're absolutely right. It's about building the anti-racist majority so that there was no space for those kinds of nefarious, awful, structural, systemic practices, outright racist practices to hide. And you know, that's a job for all of us. I just want to thank you. Thank you, Patrick, Frances, Gloria, Shav. Thank you all for attending. I want to thank Lester. Lester's your camera on or off? I don't know, because you were hiding earlier. You switched it off now. Lester's the anti-racism policy officer and is responsible for this event today. And he's put his email address in there if people have got specific issues. But I will say, I'll indulge myself and say the last words, which are join a union, be in a union, tell every Black and BME person or other person you know to join a union, because it's the only way that we actually get the unions to do what needs to be done is by being in them. And so thank you. And this is recorded and it's being live streamed, and we're going to turn it off now. So goodbye.